So where do you start with a game like Firewatch, or rather where do I start with a game like Firewatch? Well, let me start by telling you a little about it. Don't worry, I won't be discussing any major plot spoilers, just some of the game's central premises, its mechanics and a little of the setup. You play as a guy named Henry. To discuss his past in any great length would reveal elements of the story that I just don't want to spoil, so let's just say that he's been in a difficult spot these last few years and as a result has decided to take a job as a volunteer fire lookout in the Shoshone National Forest of Wyoming. Shoshone is a beautifully remote landscape, seemingly void of any other people for you to interact with, save one, Delilah. She's essentially your boss, and a great deal of the game is spent chatting to her over your walkie-talkie about, well, everything, to be honest. The dialogue system takes a lot of cues from the traditional Telltale formula, seeing as the two main developers were in fact leads on the Walking Dead series, so that seems kind of fair enough. You're often given a number of options to choose from to help develop Henry as a character, and these choices will then branch off into others. The system here is a lot more dynamic than Telltale's however, and we'll go into further detail on that in a minute. At a glance you could easily mistake Firewatch for a traditional walking simulator, in the same vein as something like The Beginner's Guide or Dear Esther or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. But that wouldn't be entirely correct. You wouldn't be incorrect, but that wouldn't be entirely correct, if you get what I mean. It's more of a first-person adventure game, like nothing I've ever played before really. It's sort of a semi-open world, parts of which you'll be prompted to explore to develop the plots, and parts of which that are just there to just help with the world building. There's a very basic level of interaction with the world itself. You're given a compass and a map to help navigate your environment, spacebar to hop over logs, left click to open doors and all that good stuff. However, the crutch mechanic of Firewatch is in fact its dialogue system. Highlighting objects of interest in the world will present you with a prompt to report to Delilah. These could be extraneous little objects just there to help build the world around you, or they could be things that are essential to developing the plot. The main events of the game take place over the course of a 2 to 3 month period in the midst of a blisteringly hot summer. As Henry and Delilah's relationship strengthens, weird things start to happen that steadily evoke a creeping sense of paranoia for the two main characters and by extension the player. To go into further detail would again involve spoiling the plot, but needless to say, the quality of the writing is absolutely spot on. Like some of the best I've ever seen implemented in a video game. This is aided by, again, some of the most human and grounded voice acting I've ever heard. I love games that don't treat me like the cliched dumb gamer. Subtlety is key, and Firewatch entrusts that you'll interpret many of its storytelling tactics through subtle voice changes and snippets of conversation. I don't like to call aspects of storytelling in games adult, but there really is no other way to describe the writing here. It's stupendously richly mature, which is a beautiful counter to its gorgeously cutesy and innocent art style. Henry and Delilah's exchanges are handled with a finesse achieved by only a handful of developers in the past in my opinion. You stop treating them as characters and start to see them as genuinely real people with real pasts and real problems. It's down to the player on how much of Henry's past and personality they want to relay directly to Delilah, and it works really well. Delilah's responses are always dynamic enough to sink the landings that so often fail in other games with so-called multiple paths and choices. It's never anything too grand, and I can't imagine the narrative changing too much with different choices, but because the writing and voice acting is of such a high quality, even the smallest response from Delilah can mean something intensely emotional. What could easily be interpreted as the main plot is fairly interesting too. As mentioned previously, going into too much detail about it would be incredibly spoilery, as so much of the game is built on the atmosphere of not knowing quite what's going on. So I'll just say this. It's a mystery. Like, seriously, some things happen to Henry whilst he's out doing his watch duties, and it all snowballs from there. Paranoia such as I have never known in a video game started to set in. There's nothing particularly graphic or violent about the game, and it's certainly not a horror title, but such is that feeling of isolation that you can't help swivel around on occasion to ensure that you're not being followed by a hooded figure with a scythe. My, and seemingly everybody else's, only real gripe with the game is the conclusion to said mysterious events. It's not so bad as others would have you believe, and if you really scrutinised it you certainly could find some serious plot holes I'm sure, but I liked it and I really thought it paid off in a way that marries itself to the underlying themes of the game. It sort of fits in context if you get what I mean. For me personally, the story of Firewatch isn't the central mystery that plagues the two main characters in the latter part of the game. To me, it's a story about two normal people with problems just looking for a way to sort them out. And it's those very problems that make them so relatable. The intensely beautiful yet eerily quiet and somewhat unsettling Shoshone Forest mirroring perfectly the feelings of loneliness that each character in their own way is feeling as a result of their own problems. The last 5 minutes of the game really did wrap everything up perfectly for me. I'd even go so far as to say it's one of my favourite endings to any game ever. Firewatch is a game that you just need to play. It isn't perfect, the conclusion to the whole mystery plot is poor as I said, but I have the feeling this will go down in history in the same way Bioshock or Arkham Asylum did. It will be remembered for what it left you with, and how it introduced interesting concepts and ideas to a genre that by its very definition can be construed as boring. I honestly really enjoyed every second of the 5 or so hours I spent with it. I've thought many times over the past few days that perhaps my hype for the game's release overwhelmed my ability to sensibly judge some of the weaker moments of the storytelling, but I'd like to think I'm a fairly level-headed soul and I'm going to go with my gut on this. Please play it. I'd love to discuss it with you, and that's always great, right?